Hello and welcome to the Bay College Civic Corps' first podcast. The Civics Corps is an extracurricular club at Bay Community College to help advance its members' skills in critical thinking, civic dialogue, and civic engagement. This semester, we decided to work with Waging Dialogue, a nonprofit organization which develops tools for resolving intergroup conflict through dialectical means, as well as continue with our intergenerational dialogue model. However, instead of asking questions to a collective panel from different generations, we went out individually to discuss more sensitive topics that both students and interviewee disagreed on. Our focus for this podcast is to analyze how to approach dialogue despite disagreements, not the content of the dialogue itself. This podcast is to look at what methods of dialogue worked, what did not, and how we can bring back civic dialogue by analyzing our conversations and reactions. The podcast members we have here today are myself, Hunter, I'm a member at Bay Community College going into history. Kathy, who's also going into history. We have Amber, who's going into education. We have Lizzie, who's going into environmental science. We have Gabby, who's going into social work and criminal justice. And then we also had an unfortunate circumstance where one of our members couldn't make it. However, they were essential with the participation in interviewing involved in the development of our podcast, Julie, which they're going into education. And this wouldn't be possible without our advisor, Dr. Cleese. So without further ado, I'll pass this on to Kathy to begin asking question one.
All right, so the first question we're discussing today regarding the conversations that we had with our intergenerational partners is what worked for you. For example, what words or phrases help build bridges to understanding?
I guess I can go first. I really just found that making sure they understood that you knew where they were coming from, using words like, I get that, I can see why you think that way, or I can see where you're coming from, just kind of, I guess, leveling with them and, treating them with respect and like they're a person and not an opponent.
Yeah, I feel that. I think even beyond words and phrases, body language was super important for me and my partner. Just watching and picking up on those cues of when something you say piqued their interest or something you say like they don't disagree with or agree with necessarily. And it just gives you, just paying attention to that body language. It can help deeper understanding and elaboration if you need, but yeah, body language was super important to be able to connect.
What helped me was paraphrasing. I realized that each and every time I'm using paraphrasing during any interview, people get like easily excited about it because they know that they are being listened to and acknowledged. So paraphrasing, also reflection of feeling, when I could see that from the nonverbal cues that they were getting more excited or anxious or something, then I would drop like, oh, I see that's quite intimidating for you or something. And they would, oh yeah, that was, or, so they did like that. I mean, my person did like that, at least.
I guess for me, an integral part of doing this whole interview process was knowing when to be silent and just listening to what your partner had to say. After listening, you can get a bunch of perspectives from various angles. Like, for example, my partner was very nature and they're very rural, and it wasn't the same as me, for example, who's more used to the city. So I would try to use logic or examples that worked in, let's say, a rural mindset. Oh, maybe I wouldn't talk much about the city or going to walk 5 minutes to a restaurant. I'd talk more something like, yeah, walking down a dirt road that took 30 minutes to get down, because that might be something they're more familiar with or can relate to more than one of my city dweller examples.
My experience was kind of like a mixture of a lot of you guys, kind of going back to what Amber said. acknowledging the differences we have based on our life experience, we just talked about a little more in another question, but understanding, for example, that my partner is a mother is going to give her a different perspective on the topic we are talking about, and just knowing that she is a mother can help me sit in her perspective and understand why it's different than mine. Not that it has to be different than mine or that it has to be the same as mine, but understanding why it's different and how she perceives it different than I do, I think helped us like accept each other's like opinions, where we were coming from, understanding both of us had a different experience. And also what Gabby was saying with just being quiet and just showing mutual respect was super important, I think, in this dialogue, because people do not want to open up to you and tell you their opinions, especially if it's a topic that's a little more like people don't really talk about it. They're just going to be uncomfortable if you're showing them disrespect by interrupting them, showing you're not really listening to them and everything. And we did a lot of reflecting as well, where she would say something that was a little confusing to me, so I would go back, make a mental note, and then when she was done talking, go back and ask her to expand on that, which was really important. That way, before we moved on to the next question, we were completely aware of each other's perspectives on the first one, which really helped. And does anybody else have anything to add for this question?
I think a big part of what we all had in common is like just having those patient skills, like listening, compromise, mutual respect, just the things that don't downplay what your partner's feeling or what their perspective is. So
And also clarification, I think.
yeah.
That's another really good part.
Yeah, touching on what Gabby and Kathy said, kind of, Gabby said paraphrasing and kind of just repeating back statements that they've made and making mental notes of things they said even a little while back. It kind of makes them feel like you're listening, because you are listening. And it really just shows the effort that you're putting in to connect with these people. And I think that's really important.
All right, anything else for that question? All right, then we'll move it to Amber, who has our next question.
All righty, so my question is, where did problems arise? What words or phrases created obstacles to understanding? And how did you overcome that?
I can go first if you don't mind. So when the problems during my interview were arising, I was telling myself that she has, every right to those feelings. She has every right to have her own opinions, right? And I'm not a judge. I shouldn't be a judge. Whatever life experience made her, to have those opinions. That's why I have my own opinions, because of different life experiences. So, and I am not, and I wasn't in any of the position of, proving her wrong or giving her any guidance or anything. So basically what I was doing, I was just stepping back and thinking and putting myself into her shoes, thinking, okay, why does she have to, why does she feel the way she feels, and what could have contributed to it? So basically that's what I was doing. And of course, if I was trying, if I had an urge of like trying to tell her something about it that wasn't within the diplomacy, then I would just take a deep breaths and try to, de-escalate.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like what you said, Gabby, because it's like we're not coming with the mindset that we have to prove them wrong, or that we're right and that's the only way that it is. It's important that you from the get-go you acknowledge that you have different experiences, like you said, and you're probably both uncomfortable, especially when it gets to those disagreements and you just feel that knot in your chest and you're like, oh gosh, I don't agree with what they're saying. But really, it's just about creating an environment of understanding and just being open to sharing with each other. My partner and I we agreed on a lot of the things we said, but even when it did come to those like small topics we disagreed on, just creating that environment that, it's okay what you say, because I mean, that's your life experience, and that's how you lived it. So
Certainly.
I noticed that was one of the problems with my podcast or my interview, not podcast, where feeling uncomfortable, where like you get that fight or flight, or, oh, I really don't want to talk about this right now, or those kinds of feelings would make us feel uncomfortable and wouldn't bring about the most genuine dialogue. Like maybe they'll say something to become that people pleaser kind of mindset and just not speak their mind genuinely. And while that may work for feeling okay emotionally, to have that full, genuine, productive dialogue to get both perspectives genuinely and to really just, be truthful to one another, I feel like could really just inhibit what it is you're trying to talk about. Like, and I think for me, an important part of like my takeaway is becoming used to that uncomfortableness, because, well, not only the sense of, oh, I'm numb to it, I can talk about whatever I want. I just mean like recognizing that you're feeling it or that your partner's feeling it, and being able to understand that I know I have these feelings now. I just need to talk about this regardless, because that'll bring about the most genuine outcome, the most bestest outcome, for lack of better words.
Yeah, me and my partner also kind of like Lizzie, like we agreed on a lot. We just, the one thing we disagreed on was how to go about what we were talking about. Like we agree on it, but how do we want to take care of it? What's the actions we should take? And we did a really good job of going back and forth on that. So we didn't have any huge obstacles. I think that's something that could have been a huge obstacle, and I kind of went in afraid it might be, is that sometimes, especially when you do a topic that is very kind of personal for you, is that you get defensive really fast if you feel like they're personally attacking you, or like what they're saying is just like specifically coming out of a group of people, which I think sometimes when we're having a dialogue like that, I just had to make sure not to have that reaction where I want to jump in the conversation and just be, very defensive in it and get emotional about it. You kind of, I mean, emotions are important, but it's good to just sit there and like kind of like breathe and keep your emotions in check. That way, otherwise you're not really listening to the conversation. If you have all these things in your head, like they're wrong, they're making me upset, you're not in the conversation. So I think that's something that me and her did really well. Like if we did disagree on anything, we just, sat with it, thought about it, and then responded in an appropriate way where we weren't being reactionary really to the whole situation. So it went pretty well in that way for us.
Definitely. I've been kind of sitting on this question for a little while and we were like a lot of you guys, we agreed on most things except one thing, and like everybody is entitled to their opinion. And I think one thing that is often like overlooked is that there's a time and a place for certain opinions. Like there's a time for newer thinking and there's a time for, the safe, this is how we usually do it thinking. And I think that that's really prevalent in this dialogue as it's intergenerational. And that was something that I really did notice when we did disagree. It was mostly because of a generational thing. Things that were true when she was going through the educational system are not true now. And I think just being open about that and discussing, this is why I believe what I believe, this is the evidence that I believe backs up what I'm talking about. And sometimes if you create a safe space for these people, they'll be open enough to say, yeah, I can see that this is true now. And people will, I don't want to say change their mind, but they're definitely more open to other ways of thinking if you create a safe space. And that's definitely what happened with our topic. And we did end up meeting halfway, kind of. But yeah, just creating a safe space for the person you're talking to.
In these conversations, I think it was important to go into the conversation not looking to change their mind, but looking to discuss, which I think was important. Like you kind of were saying, like, it's a place and a time. Like this wasn't going into a conversation where I was like, I'm going to change your mind. Like this is how this conversation is going to go. It's really just, we need to start with discussing things. We need to start small. We don't need to go in and be like, I'm going to change your entire worldview, which is just, it's not going to happen in one sitting conversation.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's just more like you trying to explain your perspective to them, and then they explain their perspective to you, and it's like, oh, now I have a couple of pairs of glasses to work with. Then you talk to a few more people, and now you have a whole walk-in closet full of these various glasses you can wear based on all the perspectives you've seen. And it's like, huh, which way do I want to look at it today? And you kind of get to pick out and choose on all these different things. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting that we're all willing to go into these dialogues and conversations and come out with so much information like we are.
That's a really good perspective. That's kind of, I was trying to come up with a way to describe it and you did it perfectly, because like today, this perspective might be the right perspective, but tomorrow things are constantly changing and that
Yeah.
perspective might be relevant tomorrow.
Tomorrow's a little too sunny. We need a bigger pair of glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Does anybody else have anything to talk about on this question? All right, let's move on to Hunter.
Okay. Did you note anything that may be considered an intergenerational difference in mindset or understanding from lived experiences and what's true for them? I can just start. My partner was a 60s, 70s, kind of 80s child, and they were very in touch with nature, for example. It was kind of like that Cold War conservation era, and which had a very different family structure and different values compared to me. So I think when it came to discussing certain subjects that revolved around home base for them, what was kind of close and what was really personal, the intergenerational difference really showed with like the kind of language or disciplinary actions taken, or just like the little nuanced things we don't even think about, like how did breakfast go? If you have a bigger family, it's a lot more cost effective to make one big pot of something and just there you go. And that was my partner, for example. And that family setting is a lot more different than me, where it's more like individualized, or you see, it's like just the little nuanced things that can change the perspective so much. So like, like I know I said that this person's very in touch with nature. For me, I'm more of a city background with technology, and it really did shape our perspective in just these two completely different directions. And my partner's truths became very varied compared to my own. But in spite of all of that, with all these little nuances and differences, we were able to find common ground in spite of it, because we were both willing to open ourselves up to have these conversations and be like, yeah, I can see how that might work. Here's how we might bring these two ideas together, or how can we work to come to a mutual understanding. And just, yeah.
Yeah, you bring up good points. My partner and I, we also talked a lot about environmental issues, and she's older than me. So it was just interesting when she talked about her experience, and I could compare it to mine, because she's lived through changes and laws. And it was so interesting because she kept sharing this information that I had like no idea about. And I mean, isn't that all that experiences are? Just, ways to share information and knowledge and ways to gain those things, and being able to share them was really nice, and just talk to her about it.
Well, I previously touched on the intergenerational thing with my subject going through the educational system. And I think with our subject, like it's constantly improving, or I mean, that's the way it should be. And how do I describe it? I got very lucky with my partner, and she was very open to absorbing the information that I was giving her. But I could definitely see that there were generational things. Like, I think there's a huge emphasis on education these days. Like, it's huge. But when she was in school, it wasn't like that. Like, especially as a woman, education, like home ec was still big. She did Girl Scouts, but she didn't go on to get a higher education. Like, she was never pressured to do that. It wasn't something that was something she was going to do. And now she's starting to realize how big education is now, and like why that's what I'm pursuing. And there was one point where we kind of came together, and she told me that she really respected my reasonings for going into education now that she understands where I'm coming from, which I think was I really appreciated that. And it made me more open to understanding where she was coming from. And that's kind of just the generational overlap that we noticed.
Yeah, we
know, we-
definitely faced, sorry, Hunter.
No, I just had a comment about what Amber was saying. I'm sorry. I just found it interesting that she was commenting on that because that kind of commenting or propping up, I guess you could say, it's kind of like it encourages not just you, but them to do more dialogue too. Well, if I didn't realize how education was this, like if I didn't realize how prominent education was, and now I do, what other things am I not realizing by not having this dialogue? Or like for you, for example, you were able to bring this perspective to your partner. And now you can go out and have more dialogue based on what you did now with those two glasses and go and have more and then more and more and more and more until you've talked to so many people you can't lost count. And it's like you just like Lizzie was saying too, we're just sharing stories and perspectives. And I think that's really a fundamental part to all of this. It's just, here's what I have to say. Here's what my glasses look like. Mine might have a hint of orange in them, but it still has my perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like that glasses analogy. So we definitely, like I said, we agreed on a lot of things. We definitely saw generational difference, however, in how we grew up, which was a really big thing because our topic was on the LGBTQ plus community and education in high school and middle school and like elementary school. And our lived experiences were different just because of when she was raised. Her family was a product of the time, more conservative. They didn't really talk about it. Wasn't talked about in their school system. And at first I was like, well, then we should just put it into the school system right away. And she said, when she was younger, because she didn't experience it a lot, that sometimes they would just confuse her so much because she's getting one thing from home and one thing from school, which gave me a very different perspective on what I was looking at, which complemented our views very well, because then we could kind of, tweak the way we see things to make it this like good medium where we can't change things overnight like I want to. We can't just push all these things. It's not going to happen overnight. She was much more of like patient. She has seen this thing grow over time, the acceptance of it, which she completely supported. We just really differed on how schools should handle it because, how they handled it when she was, younger, and then versus me, who we were very open about it. In school wasn't taught, but we were still open about it. We had people that were out. I had lots of, gay friends, gender friends. So for us, like, I'm like, of course we should teach it in schools. And she's like, but not every kid is going to grow up the way I did, where it's very easy for them to accept it. So that was like our generational difference. And we worked through it very well, I think.
What I can add that I have noticed that when it comes to any intergenerational topics that we were talking about with my partner, she had really strong, she's very opinionated pretty much about everything. So because I am younger, she kind of thought that, okay, well, I am, more wise than you are because I am almost 70. So I am basically 3 decades wiser than you. So she's been always trying to slightly add into the conversation, that's showing that she knows everything better, even though I am an individual who survived the communism, right? I am an individual who survived 2005 bombing in London, England. I have survived, like traumatic brain injury that put me in the hospital for almost 2 months, and many other injuries that I have sustained. So it's not like I am, less knowledgeable than she is. So I think that's kind of the difference that I felt talking to her, even though we, usually we always have really good contact with each other because we have known each other our whole life. But then I can always feel the hints that she makes that, hey, but I know this should be that way, but or trying to convince me that her way is always the best way. So,
I
dealing with that
definitely,
was hard.
yeah, I could definitely could think that. And I know that Julie had said that with her partner, she felt very intimidated by her, almost is the way I would describe how she was talking about it. And I think it can be that way when you're talking to your elders, especially because they just have this sense of wisdom about them most of the time. But if you really think about it, just because somebody's lived so many years on earth doesn't mean that they've had more experiences than someone who's younger than them. And that's something you really have to start thinking about people as individuals rather than their generation, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I had an even more relatable example. Like if you're entering high school as a freshman, these seniors are the biggest, oldest people you've ever known. And then 4 years go by, and then you're that senior, and you're like, oh, I'm only 17, 18. I don't know what's much different about me than I was as a freshman. And then I don't know, I just think that's a good example because like it's kind of like, oh my God, these scary seniors, you never want to talk to them. And then when you're actually the senior, you're like, why are these freshmen running from me? I'm just a person. So, but yeah, I can definitely see how it can be intimidating and just bring in so much, people pleasing kind of tendencies, fight or flight, not wanting to be genuine with them, and just, not wanting to be uncomfortable. But yeah, I think that's good. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to add to this question? Going once, going twice, sold. Okay. I'll kick it off to Lizzie then with question 4.
Awesome. So my question is, what topics could you potentially innovate around together, and which ones seemed impossible to find common ground on? And I suppose I can kick it off too. So my partner and I, we talked a lot about rural versus urban, and we talked about how to live sustainably in both those places, and we talked a lot about mental health as well. And I don't know, it just seemed like we could go on and on forever about what we were talking about, especially with mental health differences, because I've always grown up in more of a rural area. I lived pretty close to the cities. I was about an hour away from the city, so I went there all the time. But I really grew up with those rural traditions and stuff. And she's been to like way bigger cities than I have. Like she's traveled, and so she had that experience, and it was just interesting, just talking to each other and just always thinking of new things to ask, and always thinking of little details that you never thought about before. So that was always super fun.
I can go next, I guess. So with my partner, because she immigrated same as I did, however she immigrated, she's been on immigration, basically living abroad for over 35 years. I've been around 20 now. We found a common ground talking about immigration and different races and advantages of being an immigrant, disadvantages, or about ethnicity. We love, like everything when it comes to different cultures, their food, their beliefs. So we could spend hours and hours talking about it because she lives in Holland. So, however, I would love to go into mental health, just like you said, like you said, we're about the mental health. So, because she was like a director of the rehab place, she is very anti-drug, whereas here in the US, there have been trials regarding psilocybin and LSD for treating depression, PTSD, and even substance use disorder, and they have been really promising. So unfortunately, we have found lots of disagreement on this ground. So
through expanding upon the questions where we reflect, going back and asking her, for example, she asked me when I was like, I think there should be a gender and sexuality curriculum class in school. And she was like, but how would you go about that? What kind of exact information would be in that? Do we have an entire class for it? what steps do we need to take for that to happen? And when she expanded upon that, we went on to this whole tangent, not really a tangent, but how we just went back and forth with different ideas of how that could be addressed with her views as someone who doesn't think it should necessarily be an entire class. And then my views are like, it should be, but we were able to innovate it and kind of make it into like, we can start putting seeds into classes that, you know, include that gender and sexuality education and history, where we include books that have, you know, same-sex couples, you know, even the younger kids, like having that kind of gender openness in school, not necessarily an entire class, but giving those resources. Because, you know, she was like, it's from not exactly the school's job to necessarily introduce that, maybe the parents, but we can still offer, you know, to where we make it to a safe place for people to learn. And that was a really amazing conversation, really, that we were able to just come together on. And I think a lot of people would agree with what we came up with. And I just think it shows it's very possible for people to like come together on this topic and so many other topics and just make a compromise where it is, you know, will benefit society as a whole, but still like we have those views of both parties.
That's a really effective way of having a dialogue with someone, because that's actually something they teach you how to interact with children in a similar way. And instead of shutting the person down, you ask them, like, what's your plan? Like, how are you going to go about this? Instead of saying, no, you can't do that. And I think that's really interesting, and things that we teach parents and people that work with kids just generally work with anybody, honestly. And I don't know, it just reminded me of that. And that way it's more of a productive conversation, and you're not just like butting heads, but you're just actively taking steps to get to the same goal. And yeah, I thought that was a really great way to go about that.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, it sounds like a really productive one, especially with the compromise part, because a lot of like what my partner was talking about was or like what we were talking about, it did involve a lot of what could we compromise on, or where could we both find and work to get common ground. And we found that by both of us talking about it, it could happen. And with every single conversation we did have some form of compromise. And we both walked away with that sort of different understanding. So in terms of like innovating around it, our topic was kind of far-fetched in the future. So it wasn't necessarily what might like specifically might we innovate on, but potential ideas we could innovate on. And I like Amber's bringing in what they teach kids and how you interact with them, and it's not to shut them down, because the former Bay education professor, she said, let the kid make a snowman. If they want to have feet for a nose, let them have feet for a nose. Like, it's still their snowman. It's how they want to make it. You don't just shut it down. Just like with our ideas and innovating, they're just ideas. At most, they're just not going to be accepted as an idea. And then instead we can just talk about it and see if it'll work, and talk about what consequences it might have, what unintended consequences it might have, or how we can best implement it, what it might mean for the future. Just, it got into all these deeper levels of conversation and dialogue, which I found very productive. And it also brought about a need for both of us to want to have a good outcome, instead of it devolving into yelling at each other and labeling words at one another and just name calling and all these things that add on to like a bad environment. Because, you know, we talked about wanting to build that good environment. So I think by having that sort of willingness together, compromise, build my snowman the way I want to build it, it's like, man, we got a really, really well-built environment here. So
Yeah, I feel like when you come in with that open mind, you're already setting yourself up for success, and just, it's a lot more productive of a conversation if you just, you know, like you said, not shut it down at the gate. So yeah. Any other comments? Awesome. I'll turn over to Gabby then.
Here we are, guys. Last question. How do you see yourself using the skills that you have acquired through this experience on the job?
I guess I can go first. I'm going to school to be an elementary school teacher, and I'm gonna have to interact with a lot of people that don't agree with what I say all the time, whether it be children or parents or faculty and administration. So I think it's important to build these skills because a teacher is a public figure and it's somebody that the next generations look up to, honestly. And working on your diplomacy and the way you communicate with people of all ages is super important, especially in a role like that. So I gained a lot of experience from this experience that I will definitely carry over into my career, like treating someone as a person and not by their age is very important. I believe in that for sure.
Yeah, I'm going into environmental work, and that's always a huge uncertainty, especially now. It's just like comes with a big question mark about what's going to happen to the world and stuff. So just coming in with an open mind, and really this stuff is applicable anywhere, if again, coming in with open mind, like stopping and understanding first instead of just immediately trying to change. Like when you come across disagreements, it's not an obstacle you're trying to get over or anything. It's just something you're trying to understand. And once you do that, then you're connecting with the other person and you're seeing them as a human, So it's important to build those bridges.
I guess I can go. With just thinking about it, it's like, well, how often do you interact with people on a day-to-day basis in general, like occupation, social life, anything? I feel like all of the skills that we've learned in doing this kind of work can be applied in one way or another to varying degrees in every part of your life. Let's say construction. You interact with your construction buddies, you have a board meeting, you meet with the architect, figure out where things need to go. And doing these dialogues helped me ask better questions, for example. So what better questions could I ask so-and-so for this building? How could I don't know, offer different ideas or perspectives based as a construction worker? Marketing, you're always interfacing with people, automotive, medical, education, musicians, art, everything. All occupations to some degree or another use some form of interaction with another person, whether they agree with you, they don't, whether they're asking questions that you find offensive or that fight or flight response kind of question. If the person's going to talk to you, you're going to use these skills. So I think that just in general, being familiarized with this kind of work, being how do we talk with another person despite our disagreements, is valuable, especially for me because I'm going into being a history professor, let's say a community college. I'm going to be interfacing with a variety of different students from a variety of different generations who hold a variety of different perspectives. So how do I talk to each one generally so that I can get my points across? And if they have a point they want to make, how do I give them the safe space to get their point across without other people jumping on them? All of these skills, I feel like for me, are just, it's what I have to know. And I think everybody should, to some extent, be familiar with them. So
Yeah, I learned a lot of things definitely through this experience. And one thing especially is even if I don't agree with the way they perceive things, their opinion, it doesn't mean that like I can still put myself in their position and kind of understand why they see things that way. And as a historian, that really benefits me because I have to look at a huge array of historical actors from the past that I can't even sit down and have a conversation with. I have to look at from where I am now to see how they laid things out, why they did it that way. And through that I have to have some sort of a historical empathy for these people who I may not morally agree with what they did at all. But if through studying it, I can put myself in their shoes and maybe get a glimpse of how all of these contributing factors during the time that they were alive may have forced the way that they were acting. Was it okay? No. But if we were to do something today that we felt was morally right at the time, and years from now people look back, they have to understand all of the factors that went into what we did. And not even just being an historian, but I think everyone should do something like this, like have an experience like this, because I think it's crucial, just like Hunter said, to really any career path you go into, you're going to have to interact with people that you don't agree with, even if it's not through your career path, but through your social life. And if you go through life constantly bickering and getting defensive with people, you're never gonna make any progress in the world. And through sitting down with these people and having these actual conversations, they become so much more human, because today it's so easy to throw labels on people. As soon as they have one opinion, you're this, and you're stupid for thinking that, and you're this and that. And through like actually sitting and having a conversation where we listen to each other, they're so much more human now. Like we're really just two people who both perceive things because of the way our life experiences have brought us here, which I think is just super important to any career at all, really.
Those were really great points, Kathy. Thank you. And all of you anyways. To me, it was a brilliant experience, really. Especially since I'm majoring in social work. So those interviewing skills are absolutely crucial on the job. Even though my partner and I have known each other for so long, I kind of felt obliged to, be professional, like be on the job. And because usually I am like super hyperactive person, obnoxious, loud, I like to express my feelings. I knew I had to like constantly self-monitor myself, like being aware of those nonverbal cues. For instance, making sure that I had maintained eye contact with her. On top of that, for example, matching her expressions as well, right? Maintaining the calmer voice, which isn't me, right? It's totally not me. Just this constant self-awareness of and monitoring that, here you have to listen to the person, what person is saying, but here, you still have to monitor yourself, or not to think how you're gonna respond to the person's, during the conversation. And then even like, monitoring the way, because obviously we are the creatures that no matter what, we always have our biases. We can become judgmental, right? So even putting this away, it was super hard. And I genuinely think that being non-biased is impossible, because like we as humans, we all have our life experiences that we are going through, and we base our biases on those experiences. So when we have somebody, talking about, let's for example say I am an anti-vaccine, or I am, totally into vaccines, and then the problems do arise. And, even though you, for example, might be totally, I want to vaccinate my kids, and, being like self-aware, hey, that is not a battle in here. We have to respect each other and monitor constantly. As I said, it was an amazing experience, and thanks to it, I have learned a lot, and thanks to you guys, anyways. Now, Dr. Place will have a closing for us.
Well, thank you all. That was an amazing discussion. Really enjoyed listening to how you processed what you've been through this semester. I'd like to thank all of our amazing Civics course students and their dialogue partners for their participation this semester. Through an initial series of interactive sessions focused on building civic diplomacy skills, the students learned and practiced basic but critical historical and psychological concepts that gave them a social and scientifically based awareness of how to effectively engage in dialogue across difference. Additionally, the students used critical thinking, organizational, and time management skills as they outreach to find dialogue partners and select topics to discuss in these intergenerational listening sessions. The students then conducted a meta-analysis of their experiences, which they've shared in this first of hopefully many more to come Civics Core Waging Dialogue podcast. As the students indicated, through this work, they learned and practiced a variety of job-ready skills to take into their careers and lives. I'd like to thank my dear colleagues and friends, Mr. Matt Bugatti and Dr. Alice Mayer of Waging Dialogue. Please say hello there, Alice and Matt, for their time, care, and expertise in this work. As a group, we are grateful for the enduring support of the staff, administration, and faculty of Bay College under the leadership of Dr. Laura Coleman, along with the members of the Collaborative for Compassionate Civic Engagement, who serve as the Civics Core Advisory Board. I'd also like to thank the community members who have worked with and encouraged our students, especially members of the League of Women Voters, Delta Chats, and the Great Lakes Peace Center. The type of dialogue work that the students did this semester is critically important in our times. It is part of a larger rising phenomenon in our country's history. Through years of study and observation, I've identified this as the United States civic wellness movement of the early 21st century. As I write about in a related report found on Waging Dialogue's website, the civic wellness movement is not a group or effort alone, not just one, but rather a widespread organic rise of average Americans who have had enough of our era's brand of competitive polarization as seen on TV, in the halls of governance, and social media. The work of the civic wellness movement shows where there is a unity of mindset and effort in our times, in contrast to the minority of toxic, tribalistic, and divisive forces endangering the maintenance of our republic's constitutionally based domestic tranquility and general welfare promotion as fundamental blessings of liberty. We're really glad that you shared time with us today. If you feel called to learn more about civic diplomacy skills for your everyday life, please visit Waging Dialogue's website, along with that of the Listen First Project, which hosts the National Week of Conversation each spring, as well as Citizen Connect's national calendar of dialogue events. Thank you for watching. May the dialogues of our times forge a more perfect union, one that is functional, healthy, and hope-filled for ourselves and posterity.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.